It was the kind of night that makes the world feel too quiet, like the air itself is holding its breath. I had just moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of town, a single-story, weathered place with faded white siding and a creaky front porch that sagged slightly on one side. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I liked the isolation. I'd always been someone who preferred quiet nights to the constant hum of neighbors and traffic, so this house, tucked behind a line of old pines and bordering an abandoned field, seemed perfect. The first few nights were peaceful, almost unnaturally so. There were no cars, no barking dogs, and only the occasional whistle of wind through the trees. I told myself it was exactly the kind of peace I had been craving after years of cramped apartments and loud roommates. But on the third night, I started noticing things. Small things at first. The feeling that someone was watching me when I stepped outside to take out the trash, or the faint sound of scraping across the floorboards when the house should have been empty. I told myself it was just my imagination, that old houses make noises, and that I was probably jumping at shadows. But then came the tapping. It was quiet at first, barely audible over the soft hum of my ceiling fan. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when it began. 3 soft, deliberate taps against the window beside my bed. My heart rate jumped. I sat up, staring into the dark outside. There was nothing, just the yard, the old pine trees, and the outline of the empty field beyond. I waited. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, rhythmic, impossible to mistake for wind or a branch. I held my breath, eyes wide, straining to see movement. The night pressed in on me. Eventually the tapping stopped, and I told myself I'd imagined it. Maybe a branch had brushed against the window in an odd way. My body still buzzed with adrenaline, but I forced myself to lie down, convincing myself I would sleep. Sleep didn't come. By morning I was exhausted, jittery, and certain I'd imagined it all. I checked the window, the latch secure, nothing out of place. I chalked it up to being on edge from the move, the new environment, the weird creaks of an old house. The next night I made sure all the locks were secure before bed. I even turned on a small lamp in the living room to keep the corners of the house from being swallowed in darkness. But around 2 in the morning I woke again. My phone showed the time, glowing faintly across the bedroom. And there it was, that same tapping, only louder this time, coming from the back door. I froze, my breath catching. I didn't want to move, didn't want to look, but curiosity and terror pushed me out of bed. My bare feet hit the cold wood floor, and I tiptoed toward the back of the house, clutching the baseball bat I had retrieved from the closet. The tapping continued, slow, deliberate, echoing in the otherwise still house. I reached the back door and looked through the window. Nothing, just the darkness of the yard, the outline of the field beyond, nothing moving. I strained my ears, but I couldn't hear anything other than my own heartbeat thudding in my chest. And then it stopped. The sudden silence was heavier than the noise had been. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound, and returned to bed. Sleep was impossible. My eyes stayed wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening for anything out of the ordinary. The next day, I noticed something I couldn't explain. On the back porch, right against the door, was a small pile of stones. Smooth, gray river stones stacked neatly in a tiny pyramid. I hadn't noticed them before, and I was certain I hadn't put them there. My stomach churned. I didn't touch them. I didn't breathe near them. I just stepped inside and shut the door, hoping that somehow the sight was just a fluke, something I hadn't seen before. The following night, the tapping returned, faster and sharper this time, sometimes at the back door, sometimes at the front, once even at the small window above the kitchen sink. Always deliberate, always followed by whispering. I began sleeping with all the lights on, the bat beside my bed, and my phone clutched in my hand. But no matter how prepared I thought I was, the fear didn't go away. Then came the night the whispers moved inside. I woke at 3:07 a.m., drenched in sweat, and heard soft murmurs coming from the hallway. I froze, my hand instinctively tightening around my phone. The voice, or voices, were just beyond the bedroom door, low and urgent, almost as if speaking to someone who couldn't respond. I told myself to get up, to call the police, but my body wouldn't move. I just lay there, waiting, trying to convince myself it was a hallucination, a trick of sleep deprivation. The sound of the front door opening made my blood run cold. The old hinges groaned, and I knew that sound anywhere. I didn't even dare breathe as the door closed again slowly. Footsteps moved across the living room, then the hallway, careful and deliberate. They paused just outside my bedroom. The whispering resumed, louder this time, closer. I still couldn't understand the words, but I knew they were meant for me. My heart hammered in my chest. Hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, passed in that frozen silence. Then, just as abruptly as it started, it stopped. Morning light seeped into the bedroom, and for a fleeting moment, the house felt empty again. That week, I barely slept. Every creak, every shadow made me jump. I kept a knife under my pillow, checked the locks obsessively, and avoided looking out the windows. Yet each night, the tapping returned, each time more insistent. Each night, the whispering grew closer, more urgent. Then came the morning when I found another pile of stones on the front porch. This one was different. A single stone at the top had a word scratched into it: wait. The air around me grew heavy, the world silent in a way that was almost suffocating. I didn't move, didn't speak. My own breathing seemed too loud, too obvious. I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The night that followed was the worst. I tried to sleep in the living room, near the front door, but it didn't help. At precisely 2:57 a.m., the tapping started again, followed by the whispering that had become a constant, unbearable presence. This time, I dared to step toward the hallway, bat raised, heart hammering, and saw a shadow move. It was just a flicker at first, but enough to make me stumble back, nearly dropping the bat. The shadow moved along the wall, slow, deliberate, like it knew the house better than I did, and then it vanished. I spent the rest of the night awake, watching, listening. Every noise was magnified. Every shadow felt alive. By the time dawn came, I felt hollow, drained, and utterly terrified. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. Objects moved when I wasn't looking: my coffee mug, my keys, even the knife under my pillow. Stones kept appearing in the most unusual places: on the bathroom counter, at the base of my bed, on the windowsill in the living room. And the whispering, it never stopped. Even in the daytime, I thought I could hear it, faintly, just beyond the edges of my hearing. I stopped inviting friends over. I stopped answering calls. I stopped leaving the house except for work. Sleep became a memory, a distant, impossible concept. One night, desperate, I decided to try recording the sound. I set my phone on the nightstand, opened a voice memo app, and laid down, waiting for the familiar tapping. Sure enough, around 3:14 a.m., it started. Tap, tap, tap. I stayed perfectly still, holding my breath. Then came the whispering, faint at first, then clearer. My phone recorded it all. I didn't listen immediately. I was too afraid of what I might hear. Morning came and I finally played the recording. My stomach dropped. The whispering wasn't just voices, it was my name. Repeated, low, and rasping. And something else. Something I didn't understand yet recognized instantly. Footsteps moving across the floor, slow, measured, stopping just short of the microphone. I knew then that I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't losing my mind. Someone, or something, was inside my house. Had been for weeks, moving silently, watching, waiting. I called the police. They came, searched the house top to bottom, but found nothing. No evidence, no footprints, no forced entry, nothing, just the house. They suggested I stay somewhere else for a few nights, which I did. But even then, I felt it, that presence, watching, always. When I returned home, the stone piles were waiting. Always a new configuration, always a new word. Sometimes simple: wait, sleep, come. Sometimes long strings of letters that made no sense at all. And the whispering, it never stopped. I've tried everything: security cameras, locks, even having a friend stay over. Nothing changes. The house is mine, but it's not empty, not really. The walls themselves seem to hum with something alive, something patient. Last night I woke up again at 3:07 a.m. The tapping was louder, faster, the whispers more urgent. And when I looked at the foot of my bed, I saw it. A shadow, taller than any man, thin and featureless, standing just out of reach. I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It tilted its head, as if considering me, and then the whispering came, directly into my ear this time, words I could understand, spoken in a voice I will never forget. Soon. I don't know how much longer I can last here. I don't know if I will. The house isn't empty, and it never has been. It's waiting. Always waiting. Story the end. I lived in a small town in upstate New York, the kind of place where the streetlights flicker in the fall wind, and everyone knows everyone else's business. It was early October when I moved into the old Victorian house on the edge of town. The house had been empty for years, and for a while people said it was haunted. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really. I just wanted cheap rent and a quiet place to write. The first few days were normal enough. I spent my mornings unpacking, the afternoons exploring the neighborhood, and the evenings setting up my tiny workspace in the back room, overlooking the overgrown yard. At night, I could hear the wind through the trees, the occasional scrape of a branch against the siding. It was peaceful, or at least it should have been. The first strange thing happened on my second night. I was lying in bed, reading by the light of my bedside lamp, when I heard a knock. It was soft at first, almost like a gentle tap. I froze, convinced it was someone at the front door, but then I remembered I'd locked it. I waited. The sound didn't come again. Shaking my head, I told myself it was just the house settling and went back to reading. The next night, the knocking returned. This time it was louder, and it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the window. I sat up in bed, straining to see through the darkness, but there was nothing there, just the moonlight and the shadows of the trees swaying against the glass. I tried to ignore it, but the noises grew more frequent. Footsteps in the hall when I was alone, the sound of doors opening and closing by themselves, whispers I couldn't understand. I installed locks on every door, but they didn't stop it. I even bought a small camera to monitor the hallway, but when I checked the footage in the morning, there was nothing. No one, no movement, nothing to explain the sounds that had kept me awake. One night, I woke to find the temperature in the room had dropped drastically. My breath formed little clouds in the air, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. Then I saw it. A shadow, taller than a man, moving silently across the room. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It stopped just short of the bed, and I felt its presence, like a weight pressing down on me. Then it was gone, and the room warmed again, as if nothing had happened. I considered leaving. I thought about packing my things and never coming back. But each morning, when I walked through the sunlit streets of the town, everything seemed normal, and I told myself I had imagined the night's events. Maybe it was stress, maybe lack of sleep, maybe I was losing my mind. But the house didn't stop. The noises got more personal. Whispers calling my name, objects moving just out of my sight, doors opening and closing while I was in another room. Once I woke to find the back door wide open, though I was certain I had locked it before bed. The wind had kicked up, rattling the old frame, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. It didn't make me feel safer, though. At night, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and twist, moving in ways they shouldn't. I would wake up to the feeling of being watched, even when I was alone. One night, I decided to stay awake. I sat in my chair, the lamp on, notebook in hand, determined to catch whatever it was. Hours passed. Midnight came, then 1, then 2. And then I heard it, the slow creak of footsteps on the hardwood floor. They weren't coming from the hall this time. They were coming from the back room. I gripped my notebook like a lifeline, my heart pounding. The footsteps stopped just outside the doorway. I didn't dare look. I just sat there, listening. And then I heard a whisper right next to my ear. "Why are you here?" I bolted upright. The room was empty. No shadow, no figure, nothing. Just the empty chair across from me and the quiet hum of the night. After that, I tried reasoning with it. I spoke aloud, telling whoever or whatever it was that I meant no harm, that I just wanted to live in the house peacefully. But the responses grew more aggressive. Objects started flying off shelves, windows slammed shut on their own, and the whispers became angry, insistent. One night, I woke to see handprints on the walls, black and smudged, reaching toward the ceiling. I had cleaned them in the morning. There was no explanation for how they had reappeared. I called the landlord, demanding answers, but he laughed it off, saying the house had been empty for years, and sometimes old houses settle in strange ways. I started losing track of time. Nights blurred into days, and I couldn't remember if I had slept or just sat in the dark listening to the house breathe. The shadows seemed to take on forms I couldn't describe, lurking just out of sight. I would catch glimpses of figures in the corners of my vision, only to find nothing when I turned my head. Then came the scratching. Not from the outside, not from the walls, but from inside the floorboards themselves. I would be lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard the slow, half deliberate sound of nails scraping across wood beneath me. The sound moved, circling the bed, coming closer, then receding. One night, it stopped at the edge of the mattress. I felt a cold touch against my ankle, like icy fingers brushing my skin. I screamed, but no sound came out. My body refused to move, and then it was gone, leaving only the cold lingering in the air. I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to leave, but every time I packed my things, something prevented me. Bags would disappear, doors would lock themselves, and the whispers would grow louder, more insistent. "Stay," they said. "Don't leave." Eventually, I stopped trying. I stopped speaking to anyone, stopped going out. I lived in that house in constant fear, barely sleeping, barely eating. The presence became my life, my shadow, my companion. And still, it wasn't enough. It wasn't satisfied with just my fear. One night, I woke to find it standing at the foot of my bed, taller than any man, with limbs that seemed too long, too thin, and a face that I couldn't see. Just the suggestion of eyes, black and empty, staring at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It whispered again, soft and cold, "You belong here now." The lights in the room flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness, but I could still feel it, pressing closer, circling, watching. I realized then that I would never leave. Not really. The house had claimed me. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, months, maybe years. Time has no meaning in the dark corners of this house. I hear the wind outside, but it doesn't reach in. The whispers are constant, urging, guiding, threatening. I speak to no one. I write this now on a notebook, but even these words may not last. If you ever come across an old Victorian house on the edge of a quiet town, take my advice. Don't move in. The silence isn't peaceful. The empty rooms aren't empty. And if you hear whispers in the night, don't answer. Some houses don't want visitors. Some houses don't want anyone to leave. Story the end. It started with the kind of silence that makes your ears ache. I had just moved into an older house on the outskirts of a small Midwestern town. A modest two-story with faded paint and a sagging porch. It was cheap, and that's all I could afford after my divorce. I had always preferred quiet neighborhoods, places where the only sounds at night were the wind rustling through trees or the occasional car passing far down the street. I liked it at first, the sense of being away from the world, away from everyone. But that night, the quiet felt wrong. I was lying in bed, the single lamp on the nightstand casting a soft yellow glow across the room, scrolling through my phone. My apartment, or house now, was old enough that the wood floorboards creaked under the slightest movement. I'd gotten used to that. The sound was comforting, in a strange way. It reminded me that the house was alive, that it existed beyond the confines of my own imagination. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was a branch brushing against the window. I had trees on the property, though mostly set to the side of the house, and a little wind could make them knock against the siding. But the taps continued, steady, deliberate. They came from the back of the house. My stomach sank and my heart started to pound. I told myself it was nothing, just the old house settling or maybe an animal. But the taps didn't stop. They grew slightly louder, more insistent. I laid there for a while, heart hammering, convincing myself to ignore it. Eventually, I couldn't. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, careful not to make noise. My bare feet touched the cold floor, and I crept toward the bedroom door. The hallway was dark, silent except for the occasional creak of the floor. I approached the kitchen and froze. The back door, the only way to the yard, had 3 distinct taps on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't see anything, not a movement, not a shadow. The night outside was thick, dark, impossible to read. I wanted to call out, to demand someone announce themselves, but I was rooted in place. Then it stopped. The silence was heavier than the tapping. My stomach twisted. I waited, every nerve in my body alert, and slowly, reluctantly, I backed toward the bedroom. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I tried to laugh it off. The house was old, creaky. I must have imagined it. But when I stepped onto the back porch, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A small pile of stones stacked neatly by the door. Smooth gray river stones, not something I had lying around. I didn't touch them. I didn't even get close. I went back inside and tried to convince myself it was a neighbor playing a prank. But I didn't know anyone on the street yet, and the nearest neighbor's house was more than 100 yards away. That night, I double-checked every lock, every latch, and left a lamp on in the kitchen. But around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound again. Tapping, faster this time, followed by whispering. Faint, just on the edge of comprehension, but definitely there. It came from the hallway outside my bedroom. I froze, clutching the blanket to my chest. The whispers were soft, unintelligible at first, like someone mumbling under their breath. Then, one word broke through clearly. My name. I stayed motionless, unable to move, my ears straining to hear more. The footsteps started after that. Slow, deliberate, moving toward the living room, then pausing, then returning near the hallway. I didn't breathe, didn't even blink. I couldn't tell how long it lasted, maybe minutes, maybe hours. But eventually the sounds faded, leaving an oppressive silence that seemed to weigh down the walls themselves. By morning, exhaustion had set in. I went to work trying to act normal, trying to convince myself I was just overtired. But that evening, the house seemed different, oppressive, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. For the next few weeks, the tapping and whispering became part of my nights. Sometimes the tapping was at the back door, sometimes at the front. Sometimes the whispers were so close I could feel them against my ear. Stones appeared in different places, on the porch, by the kitchen sink, even at the base of my bed. Sometimes they had words scratched into them. Wait. Sleep. Come. I called the police once, thinking someone might be entering the house, leaving these stones and trying to scare me. They searched the house top to bottom, found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing. They suggested staying somewhere else for a few nights, but the thought of leaving only made me more anxious. I wanted to stay and see if I could understand what was happening. The nights grew worse. I started sleeping with all the lights on, a baseball bat under my pillow, and my phone in my hand. But no matter what I did, the sounds returned, always louder, always closer. One night, I awoke to the sound of breathing, slow, steady, and heavy, just outside my bedroom door. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel the presence, like a shadow pressing against the walls. Eventually, I tried recording the sounds, setting my phone on the nightstand. Around 3 a.m., the tapping started. Tap, tap, tap. Then the whispers, so faint at first, growing louder, moving closer. When I played back the recording in the morning, my stomach sank. The voice was mine. My name repeated, my own voice distorted, like it was coming from inside the house, but not from me. Footsteps echoed on the recording, stopping just short of the microphone. It was then I realized the truth. The house was not empty. It hadn't been empty from the beginning. It was waiting. Patient, deliberate, watching, and it knew me. I tried everything. More locks, cameras, leaving for a few days. Nothing helped. Stones kept appearing. Whispering never ceased. I could feel eyes on me even when the house was supposedly empty. Last night I woke at 2:57 a.m. again. Tap, 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 whispering. I swung my feet out of bed, bat in hand, heart hammering. And there it was at the foot of the bed, a shadow, taller than a man, thin and featureless, standing just out of reach. It tilted its head, and I could hear the whispers in my own ear, clear as daylight. Soon, it said. I don't know how much longer I can stay in this house. I don't know if anyone ever has. It is alive, and it is waiting. Always waiting. Story the end. It started with the move. I had just left my cramped apartment in Albany, looking for something quieter, somewhere I could finally write in peace. I found a small 2-story house on the outskirts of a town in upstate New York. The rent was low, the landlord was eager, and the previous tenant had left suddenly, leaving some furniture behind. I didn't care. I needed space, privacy, a place where the wind through the trees would be the only sound at night. The first week was uneventful. I unpacked slowly, filled the empty rooms with my belongings, and set up my desk by the window overlooking the yard, where the grass had grown wild and the trees pressed close to the house like they were listening. Nights were quiet, and I welcomed it, falling asleep to the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Then the noises began. At first, it was subtle. A creak in the hallway, a tap at the window, a soft thump above my head. I told myself it was the house settling, that old houses always made noise, and tried to ignore it. But the sounds grew more deliberate. Footsteps pacing across the floorboards when I was in the kitchen. Doors I knew I had closed slowly opening. The unmistakable sound of breathing in a room I was sure I was alone in. I bought locks for every door and made sure to secure the windows at night. I even placed a chair against the bedroom door, a primitive defense I hoped would give me some sense of control. But the presence in the house seemed undeterred. Every night around the same time it would start. The footsteps, slow and heavy, circling the room, stopping outside my bedroom door. The first night it spoke, I froze. A whisper, barely audible, came from the dark hallway. My name. Just my name, drawn out, soft and coaxing. I bolted upright, my heart racing, scanning the shadows for something I couldn't see. But there was nothing. Only the dim glow of the streetlight outside filtering through the blinds. Sleep became impossible. Nights bled into days, and I began to question my own senses. I would wake to find objects moved from where I had placed them. Chairs turned, books scattered across the floor, my blanket pulled from the bed, and always the whispers. Sometimes they called my name. Sometimes they spoke words I couldn't make out. I tried talking to the landlord. I wanted to leave, wanted someone to explain it, but he laughed. Old houses, man, they make noises. You're just imagining things. I hated that laugh, hated the dismissiveness in it. I started keeping a journal, documenting every sound, every shadow, every whisper. One night, I woke to a shadow crouched in the corner of the room. It didn't move, but I could feel it. The air thickened, pressing down on my chest. I wanted to scream, but my throat refused. The shadow leaned forward, as if studying me, and then, just as quickly, it was gone. The room was empty, and I was alone, shivering under my sheets. I bought cameras, motion detectors, even a small digital recorder, but they recorded nothing. No shadows, no figures, no sounds. Yet I could hear the house breathing, circling, watching. Sometimes I would wake to the sound of footsteps right outside my bedroom, and if I dared to peek, there would be nothing. Yet the feeling of being observed was always there, lingering in the corners of my vision. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe stress, maybe too many hours alone, maybe a combination of old house noises and an overactive imagination. But that didn't explain the cold. Not just a chill, but a deep, seeping cold that enveloped me, pressing into my bones. Not the wind through the windows, not the draft from the cracked door, but something that existed only in the dark. It wasn't long before it became more than cold or whispers. Objects started moving with force. Doors slammed open and shut. Picture frames fell. I woke one night to find the back door wide open, snow from an early October storm blowing into the entryway. I knew I had locked it. I had checked it myself. I even double-checked. It hadn't budged until then. I began sleeping with a knife under my pillow, not that it helped. One night I woke to the sensation of something pressing against my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Just weight, dark and immovable, as though the house itself had come alive. I don't remember how long it lasted. I only remember waking with my heart pounding, the knife still under my pillow, my sheets soaked with sweat. I stopped leaving lights on, stopped trying to catch it on camera. I stopped leaving the house. I stopped speaking to anyone. The whispers followed me everywhere, circling, coaxing, threatening. I could feel it in the walls, in the floors, in the very air I breathed. It wasn't just the house anymore, it was me. And it wasn't satisfied with fear alone. Then came the voice. Not a whisper, not a shadow, but a clear, deliberate voice, soft yet cold, close enough that I could feel its breath against my ear. "You belong here now," it said. I bolted upright, but no one was there. The air was heavy, thick, pressing against my skin like wet cloth. My heart hammered. My vision tunneled. I tried to leave the room, the house, town, anywhere, but the doors wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't budge. Something had claimed me, and it wasn't letting go. Time lost meaning after that. Days, nights, weeks, I don't know. The house was constant, unchanging, a cage that seemed to expand and contract with the darkness. Shadows moved in patterns that weren't natural. Whispers formed words, messages, threats. Sometimes they spoke my name with affection, sometimes with anger. I couldn't tell if they were taunting me or welcoming me. I tried to document everything, writing feverishly in my journal, hoping that recording it would somehow make it stop. But the more I wrote, the stronger it seemed to become. The shadows grew darker, the whispers louder, more insistent. At times, I would wake to find the entries I had written erased, replaced with words I didn't recognize, messages that seemed alive. The final night, I know it as my final night, came with no warning. I woke to silence, no whispers, no footsteps, no cold, just stillness. Too stillness. I stepped out of bed, trying to rationalize my exhaustion, my paranoia when I saw it. The corner of the room, blacker than night, and in it the shape of something impossibly tall and thin, limbs bending at unnatural angles, face featureless yet eyes piercing. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, it simply existed. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, but my legs refused, my voice refused, and then it spoke again, not a whisper, not a threat, a statement. Clear, cold, absolute, you will never leave. I tried to blink it away, tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, a dream, but the darkness pressed closer, wrapping around me like a living thing. My heart pounded, my mind screamed, and still it didn't move. It waited. Patient. Eternal. I sit here now writing this as I have for what may be days, months, years. I cannot tell. The house surrounds me. The shadows whisper my name, beckoning, coaxing, waiting. Outside, the wind rustles through the trees, a reminder of the world I can no longer reach. I am here. I am alone. And yet, I am never alone. If you ever come across an old house at the edge of a quiet town, take my advice. Do not enter. Do not linger. Some houses are alive. Some houses remember. Some houses do not want you to leave. And if you hear whispers in the night, do not answer. Some things only follow you if you speak back. Story the end. It started the night I moved into my apartment on the north side of town. I had just graduated college and taken my first real job, which meant moving into my own place for the first time. The apartment wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom on the second floor of a two-story brick building, but it was mine. I liked the quiet. The building was old, built sometime in the late 50s, and the walls were thin, but I'd spent so long sharing spaces that the solitude felt like a luxury. The first night, I unpacked what little I had and collapsed onto the mattress I had set on the floor. The ceiling fan hummed overhead, and outside, the faint sounds of traffic trickled in through the single window. It was peaceful. Until it wasn't. I was dozing off when I heard it, a soft scraping sound from the living room. At first, I thought it was the old building settling. Pipes, perhaps, or the floorboards. But the sound was different. Deliberate. Like someone dragging something across the wooden floor. I sat up, listening. The sound stopped. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe just a rat. I had a small rodent problem in the building before I moved in, according to the landlord. I tried to fall asleep again, but my heart wouldn't stop racing. Then I heard a whisper. It was barely audible, a soft murmur that could have been the wind, or it could have been something else. I froze, straining my ears. The sound stopped almost immediately, but the feeling of being watched didn't. I spent the next few days convincing myself it was stress, the excitement and anxiety of moving into a new place. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me anyway? Oh yes, my apartment is haunted, but I can't sleep, I imagined saying. People would think I was crazy. The second week, things escalated. Objects started moving. Small things at first. My keys were on the counter 1 minute, on the couch the next. My coffee mug, which I always left in the kitchen, would appear on my nightstand. I rationalized it. Maybe I had absent-mindedly moved them. Maybe I was just tired and forgetting. But the feeling of being watched grew heavier. It wasn't until the third week that I realized I wasn't alone. I had been lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I saw it, just out of the corner of my eye. A shadow moving across the living room. My pulse spiked. I sat up listening. Nothing. I told myself I was imagining it. I was exhausted, sleep-deprived. Shadows play tricks on your mind. But then I heard the whisper again. This time, it was clearer. It wasn't just a murmur. It was a word. My name. Softly, slowly, I bolted upright, my heart hammering. My apartment was empty. No one could have been inside. I called my best friend and talked until my voice shook, trying to convince myself it was real, that I wasn't losing my mind. But I wasn't imagining it. The whispering continued over the next weeks, growing more frequent, more insistent. Sometimes it was just murmurs, unintelligible but frighteningly close, as though someone or something was right beside me. Other times it called my name, always soft, always just out of reach, like a shadow breathing in the corners of the room. Then the tapping started. It began at the window, a slow, deliberate knock. I would lie in bed, staring at the dark glass, frozen, listening to the rhythm. 3 taps. Then silence. Sometimes it was at the door. Sometimes it was both. I never knew where it would come from, only that it would. I began leaving the lights on at night. I kept a bat beside my bed. I checked locks obsessively, every knob and latch before going to sleep. Nothing helped. The apartment was alive, and I was its prisoner. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke to footsteps. Not the heavy steps of someone trying to break in, but careful, deliberate movements across the apartment. The steps stopped outside my bedroom door. My entire body froze. The whispering started again, so close this time that I felt it against my ear, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't move. I couldn't move. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. Eventually, the footsteps faded, leaving only silence and the oppressive weight of being watched. Days turned into weeks. I stopped answering my phone. I stopped going out except for work. Sleep became a memory, something I used to have before the apartment came alive. I tried recording the sounds one night. My phone lay on the nightstand, recording as I waited for the tapping or the whispers. At 3:14 a.m., the tapping began, soft, deliberate, then faster, sharper. The whispers came after, faint at first, then louder, almost urgent. When I played the recording and I felt my stomach drop, I could hear my own name being called and footsteps moving just beyond the microphone, stopping as if someone or something was waiting. I didn't last much longer in that apartment. I left after a month, moving back in with my parents for a time. But even then, I could feel it. The whispers in my mind, the shadows in the corner of my eye. Something followed me, or maybe it never left. I rented another place after a while, thinking distance would help. But it didn't. The first night, the whispering started again, faint but unmistakable. I locked all the doors, checked all the windows, even installed extra locks. Nothing helped. I began keeping a flashlight in bed, the bat under the pillow, my phone beside me with a recording app running. The tapping came back, the footsteps, the shadows moving just out of view. I could never sleep through the night without waking to some new sound, some new movement. Sometimes I would see shapes in the corners of the rooms, dark, featureless, fleeting. When I tried to approach, they disappeared. The whispers grew louder when I ignored them, as if punishing me for trying to rationalize. Eventually, I stopped trying to understand. I stopped trying to fight it. I only waited, awake until dawn, counting the minutes until sunlight made the shadows retreat, until the house or the presence went dormant for a few hours. And now, years later, I live in a suburban house, far from that apartment, far from the city. But sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I hear it. The soft whispering, barely audible, almost like a memory. And sometimes in the corner of a dark room, I see it. A shadow, tall, thin, waiting. I know it's not real. I know I'm safe. But the fear doesn't leave. It never does. Because some things, once they find you, never stop watching. Story the end. It began the night I moved into my first real apartment, alone. I had just landed a job at a marketing firm in a mid-sized Midwestern city and found a small one-bedroom in an older building near the edge of town. The rent was low, and while the neighborhood was quiet, it wasn't abandoned. The building itself was brick, built sometime in the 1960s, and creaked in ways older buildings tend to do. I liked it. Finally, my own space. No roommates, no landlords constantly knocking. Just me, my cat, and a small apartment that felt like freedom. The first night, I unpacked a few boxes, arranged my things, and tried to relax. My apartment faced the street, but by the time I had settled in, traffic was almost non-existent. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the faint hum of the streetlights outside. I turned on a lamp, set my laptop on the small kitchen table, and checked my emails before collapsing onto the mattress I had just bought. The mattress was on the floor, barely had any furniture yet, and I felt the emptiness of the room like a void around me. I shut my eyes, and sleep came quickly, though lightly, like a fragile veil I could tear through with a sound or movement. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke. At first, I thought it was my cat jumping down from the bed, but she was still curled at the foot of it, asleep. That's when I heard the scratching. Soft at first, almost gentle, coming from the living room. I froze, trying to convince myself it was the wind. But my apartment didn't have loose siding. The windows were closed. The city was quiet at this hour. My pulse quickened, and I lay still, straining to hear more. The scratching stopped. My heart sank, but I eventually relaxed and fell back into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I told myself it had been nothing. I had been on edge from the move. New city, new job, new apartment. Stress can do weird things to your mind. I unpacked some more boxes, made a cup of coffee, and settled in for my first real morning at home. Everything seemed normal, but that night it began again. And this time I couldn't ignore it. It started as a tapping, soft at first, almost imperceptible, coming from the kitchen. Kitchen. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was the pipes. Tap, 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 each one deliberate. I sat up, listening, and the sound stopped. I got up slowly, barefoot on the cold laminate floor, and crept toward the kitchen. Nothing. Just the small apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint light of a street lamp through the blinds. My nerves were frayed, and I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Over the next few nights, the sounds grew more frequent. The tapping became faster, sometimes at the window, sometimes at the door, sometimes just along the floorboards. And always, always, there was the whispering. Soft at first, unintelligible, like someone speaking in another room. Then eventually it grew clearer, though still faint, my name. Not once, but repeated softly in a voice I couldn't place. I didn't know if it was male or female, old or young. It was just there, right at the edge of my hearing. I started leaving the lights on at night. I kept a baseball bat by the bed. I even began recording the sounds on my phone, hoping to catch proof, but every recording only amplified my anxiety. On playback, the whispers were clear, but they never made sense. Just murmurs, almost like sentences interrupted, then silence. Footsteps would echo across the apartment in the recording, slow and deliberate, stopping just short of my bedroom door. Then came the objects moving. Small things at first, my keys, my wallet, a mug. I'd leave them on the counter, and when I returned, they'd be on the floor, on the table, sometimes in the middle of the living room. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was sleepwalking, maybe my cat knocked things over. But she stayed on the bed or on the windowsill most nights. And the movement wasn't random. Items were shifted, placed, almost arranged. Always noticeable, never subtle. One night, around 3 a.m., I awoke to the sound of breathing. Heavy, deliberate, almost in rhythm with my own heartbeat. It came from just outside the bedroom door. I froze. My phone lay on the nightstand, flashlight app ready. My cat hissed from the foot of the bed. The breathing stopped when I reached for the bat, and the silence that followed was oppressive, heavy, as if it filled every corner of the apartment. I called the police once. I told them about the noises, the moving objects. They came, searched top to bottom, and found nothing. No forced entry, no footprints, nothing. They suggested it might be stress, sleep deprivation, or even my cat. I hung up feeling hollow, knowing they didn't believe me, knowing I wouldn't either if the roles were reversed. The whispering never stopped, the tapping never stopped, and then the shadows came, always at the edge of my vision. Dark shapes that moved along the walls or in corners, sometimes disappearing when I turned my head. I tried ignoring them, tried focusing on work, but the sense of being watched never left. I became afraid to leave the lights off, afraid to sleep, afraid to be alone. I began keeping the recordings on loop, listening for patterns. The whispers sometimes repeated words, fragments of sentences. Wait, here, soon. Sometimes they called my name directly, with emphasis, like someone urgent, like someone desperate to be heard. The shadows seemed to respond, lingering longer, moving closer, whenever I played the recordings aloud during the day. Weeks passed and I barely slept. I stopped going out except for work. I stopped answering calls from friends. Every noise, every creak, every flicker of light seemed magnified. My apartment felt alive, aware, and I was trapped inside it. I couldn't escape it. Even leaving didn't help. The whispering followed me. In hotel rooms, in friends' apartments, even walking down the street, I sometimes swore I could hear it, just faintly, at the edge of perception. The shadows followed too, sometimes in reflections in windows, sometimes in mirrors. Always there, always watching. Then one night, the whispers became urgent. I woke at 2:57 a.m., feeling cold despite the summer heat. Tap, 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 my bedroom window. Then a soft, distorted voice, almost a growl, calling my name. My heart pounded, blood rushed to my ears. I didn't move. The breathing came again, closer than ever. The shadows gathered, forming shapes I couldn't recognize. Taller than a man, thin and featureless, pressing against the corners of the room. I gripped the bat and stared at them, frozen. And then I heard the word clearly, spoken inside my head rather than out loud. Soon. I haven't slept properly since. Years have passed and I've moved multiple times, tried therapy, tried medications. Nothing helps. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I still hear the whispering. Sometimes I see the shadows flicker in the corner of a room. I don't know what it is or why it follows me. I only know that some things, once they find you, never stop watching. They are patient, deliberate, and endlessly observant. I've learned to live with it, to exist in a perpetual state of vigilance, because the second you let your guard down, it's there again, waiting, closer than you ever realized, whispering in your ear, telling you that soon it will be too late to escape. The worst part is knowing it's always patient, always waiting, always hungry for the moment you think you're safe enough to relax, to close your eyes, to fall asleep. And when that moment comes, it will be there, inside the shadows, inside your home, inside your mind. Watching, always. Story the end. It started on an ordinary Thursday evening in late October, the kind of evening where the chill in the air feels sudden, like the world has shifted without warning. I had just finished my shift at the diner downtown, where the neon sign flickered intermittently and the hum of the fluorescent lights inside always seemed a little too loud when the last customer left. My car was parked under a lone streetlight on the edge of the lot, and I remember thinking how quiet the neighborhood was. The streets were empty, save for the occasional sound of a distant car or the rustle of leaves in the wind. I had driven this route countless times, and nothing ever felt off. But that night, something did. I was tired, drained from long hours of serving coffee, breakfast, and the occasional late-night burger to people who barely noticed me. I unlocked my car, sliding into the driver's seat, and as soon as I closed the door, I felt it, the sense that I wasn't alone. My hair stood on end, a low prickle running along my neck. The street outside seemed unnaturally dark, the shadows stretching longer than they should. I tried to shrug it off, blaming my exhaustion, and started the engine. The drive home was about 15 minutes, mostly down quiet suburban streets, lined with houses that all looked the same. Trees arched over the road, their bare branches scratching against the dark sky. My headlights cut a narrow path through the darkness, illuminating the cracked sidewalks and occasional pumpkins still sitting on a porch from the weekend before Halloween. I remember glancing in the rearview mirror and catching a flash of movement behind me, just for a moment. I thought it was another car at first, but when I blinked, there was nothing there. Halfway home, my radio started acting up. It was an old station I occasionally listened to, but now it crackled and hissed, like someone was trying to tune in through static. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just a weak signal, but then I started hearing words, faint, almost a whisper, through the distortion. They weren't words I could understand at first, just fragments of sentences, like someone speaking in a language I didn't know. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Get out. Leave now. You shouldn't be here. I froze, my heart hammering. I turned the volume down, telling myself it was just interference, maybe a trick of the tired brain, but the words had a rhythm, almost deliberate. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was shaking. My house was a modest two-story, tucked into a quiet cul-de-sac. The streetlight flickered at the end of the road, casting long shadows over the lawn. I locked the car behind me and rushed inside, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. My apartment above the garage was small but cozy, all warm lights and the smell of coffee lingering from the morning. I told myself I was imagining things, that the day had just been long, but the unease stayed with me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. Every creak of the house made me jump. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the thought didn't ease my mind. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. A soft scratching, like fingernails against the wall, coming from the kitchen. My first thought was the house settling, but the scratching continued, deliberate and slow. I grabbed my phone, the small light cutting through the dark, and crept toward the stairs. My apartment was small, but the darkness made it feel enormous. When I reached the kitchen, everything looked normal. The cabinets were closed, the sink was empty, the fridge humming softly, but the scratching didn't stop. It was coming from the pantry. I remember my hand shaking as I reached for the door, turning the knob slowly. Nothing. The pantry was empty, save for canned goods and a few bags of flour and sugar. My relief was short-lived because then I heard it behind me. A soft, wet breathing right at the edge of my hearing. I spun around, but no one was there. I went back to bed, locking the door behind me, and tried to convince myself it was just stress, just nerves. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was in the house. My phone was on the nightstand, but I was too scared to call anyone. I ended up lying awake, listening, every shadow seeming to grow and shift around me. Over the next few nights, the incidents escalated. At first, it was subtle, faint footsteps in the hall when I was alone, lights flickering, the occasional whisper that sounded like my name. I told myself it was all in my head, stress from work and the long hours, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I started noticing things out of place. A chair slightly moved, a cup that wasn't where I left it, my keys on the counter when I was certain I had put them in my pocket. One night, around midnight, I woke up to a loud bang from the kitchen. Heart racing, I grabbed a baseball bat I kept by the bed and crept down the stairs. The kitchen window was wide open, even though I was sure I had locked it before bed. The screen had been ripped off and lay on the floor, shredded. I stepped outside into the cold night, bat raised, but there was no one there. The only sound was the wind through the trees and my own ragged breathing. I locked the window, double-checked the doors, and finally went back to bed, my nerves frayed. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was restless and full of strange, fragmented dreams. I would dream of someone standing at the foot of my bed watching me, or of being followed down the street by a figure I could never clearly see. Each morning, I woke up feeling exhausted, the feeling of dread lingering. A week after the window incident, I decided to set up a camera in the living room. Just a simple motion-activated camera I could check from my phone. I told myself it was just for peace of mind. That night, I reviewed the footage and my blood ran cold. The camera showed nothing at first, just the empty room. Then, around 2:14 a.m., the lights flickered. A shadow moved across the room, slow and deliberate, even though I had left the living room empty. The shadow didn't belong to any person I could recognize. It was too large, distorted, stretching across the floor in a way that didn't make sense. Then it stopped, standing still, facing the camera, and I could see a faint outline of a figure. Not human, or at least not fully. Its head tilted unnaturally, its arms hanging too long, and then it was gone. The footage skipped after that, static filling the screen. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment, the lights on, staring at the camera feed. I considered calling someone, but who could help? Police would think I was crazy. I didn't tell anyone about the incidents at work either. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Over the next few days, the presence became more aggressive. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. My bedroom door would be wide open when I knew I had closed it. I started finding notes, written in a shaky hand, left on my desk or the kitchen counter. I see you. Don't sleep. It's watching. I tried to convince myself someone had broken in, but there was no sign of forced entry other than the window, and the notes didn't make sense. There was only one handwriting style, but it wasn't human. The letters were uneven, elongated, almost like they were carved into the paper by claws. One night I decided I had had enough. I was going to confront it. I waited until the middle of the night, bat in hand, and sat in the living room, the camera running, lights blazing. Around 2 a.m., I heard the familiar scratching, this time from the ceiling. My heart jumped. I grabbed the bat and shouted, "I know you're here. Show yourself." Silence. Then a low, guttural laugh coming from all directions at once. It was deep, echoing, unnatural. The temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. The shadows in the room stretched and writhed, moving like liquid across the walls. I swung the bat blindly, but it passed through empty air. And then I saw it. In the corner of the room, a figure, taller than any human, with glowing eyes that reflected the light. Its limbs were long and jerky, moving in ways that made my stomach churn. It tilted its head as if examining me, and then it spoke, a voice like nails on metal. "You shouldn't be here. You never should have come." I ran. I ran without looking back, out the front door, into the street. My neighbors, asleep, didn't hear me screaming. I didn't stop until I was down the block, gasping, shaking, soaked in sweat. I called my friend to come get me, but even as I spoke, I could feel it behind me, just at the edge of my vision. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't gone back inside my apartment since. The lease is still active, but I can't bring myself to step through that door. I've stayed with friends in hotels anywhere but there. The weirdest part is when I check the security camera remotely, the footage keeps showing the figure, standing in the dark corners, watching. It hasn't left. And sometimes in the middle of the night, my phone buzzes with messages I didn't send. Still watching. I know where you are. You can't hide. I've tried everything, locking doors, changing the locks, even consulting a local priest, but nothing works. I keep telling myself it's only here, not in the real world. But I can feel it, always, waiting. And last night, when I was finally trying to sleep on my friend's couch, I saw it, just outside the window, staring in, head tilted, glowing eyes focused on me. It's patient, it knows I'm scared, and I think deep down that it wants me to return. I don't know if I ever will. Story the end. The first night I moved into my new apartment, I thought it was just the usual adjustment jitters. The place was small, a one-bedroom in a brick building in an older part of Chicago. The floors creaked more than I expected, and the heater rattled when it came on, but I liked the character of the apartment. It was cheap, the landlord was nice enough, and the location was convenient for work. My plan had been simple: unpack, maybe watch a movie, and get a good night's sleep. By midnight, the apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I was just about to doze off when I heard it, the faint sound of tapping. At first, I thought it was just the old pipes, maybe the heater settling, but the tapping persisted. It was irregular, like someone was lightly drumming their fingers on the wall. I told myself it was nothing. I had an imagination prone to exaggeration at night. Eventually, I closed my eyes, hoping to sleep through it. It wasn't the tapping that woke me the next night. It was the whisper. I hadn't realized I'd drifted off. In the middle of the night, I heard my name, soft, drawn out, Emma. I froze, convinced I was dreaming. My apartment was small enough that I could see the living room from the bedroom doorway, and the air felt unusually cold. I called out, "Hello?" but the only response was silence. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I tried to rationalize it. Old buildings make noises. Maybe I had been half asleep and imagined the whisper. I told my best friend about it over coffee, expecting a laugh or at least sympathy. She didn't laugh. She gave me that look, concerned, serious. "Emma, sometimes old apartments have energy, you know? I've read about it. Not like ghosts in movies, but residual feelings, memories. Some people are sensitive to it." I nodded, smiling weakly, but I didn't tell her about the tapping. That night, I set up my phone on the nightstand to record the sounds. Around 2 a.m., the tapping returned. Louder this time, closer. I held my breath, not daring to move, and then the whisper came again. My name, drawn out in the same slow way, "Emma." I turned on the recording the next morning, heart pounding. I listened, and my blood ran cold. The whisper was there. I could hear it, faintly, almost hesitant, but unmistakable. I started noticing little things during the day. Doors I was sure I'd locked were open. My keys moved from the counter to the floor. Sometimes when I came home from work, I could swear I felt someone watching me, though the apartment was empty. I rationalized it at first: tiredness, paranoia from lack of sleep, maybe stress from the new job. But then I noticed the scratches. The first one was on the inside of my bedroom door. Just a small line, shallow, but I knew it hadn't been there before. I traced it with my finger, heart hammering. Over the next week, more appeared, on the floorboards, on the windowsill, faint on the walls near my bed. They weren't random. They seemed almost deliberate, as if someone or something was marking the space. I tried ignoring it, but ignoring didn't help. One night, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was overreacting, when I felt it. Breath. Not my own. Someone was in the room, leaning over me. I bolted upright, but the bed was empty. The window was closed. The door was locked. My heart wouldn't stop racing, and I had to sit there for hours until dawn, listening to the house sigh and creak as if it was mocking me. Sleep became impossible. I started staying up later and later, trying to catch it at its worst, thinking if I understood it, maybe I could stop it. The tapping would come, sometimes on my walls, sometimes on the floorboards, even the ceiling. And always the whisper. Always my name, dragged out, soft and deliberate. I recorded it every night. The recordings were haunting. My friends refused to listen past a few seconds. They said it sounded like static or wind, but I could hear it clearly. One night, I got bold. I set up cameras around the apartment, everywhere I thought it might appear. I left them running and went to bed, exhausted and terrified. Around 3 a.m., I felt it again. The weight in the room, the breath close to my ear. I couldn't move. I watched my phone camera app in the dark, the small screen glowing, and then I saw it. Not fully, just a shape, a shadow near the corner of my bedroom, taller than me, hunched slightly. It didn't move like a human. Its head tilted, and I could feel, not see, its gaze. I screamed and bolted upright. It was gone. I turned on all the lights and checked the footage. When I reviewed it in daylight, my stomach dropped. The shadow wasn't fully visible, just a blur. But there it was, an outline standing by my bed, tilting its head as if examining me. I called the landlord, trying to sound rational. I think there might be an issue with the building. Structural, maybe? Something strange happening in my apartment. He laughed, but not unkindly. Emma, you're on the third floor. Nobody's up there after midnight but you. I'll come by tomorrow. The next day, he checked the apartment, opened every closet, tested the doors, looked under the floorboards, even behind the heater. He found nothing. Old building, he said. Sometimes your mind plays tricks. You get used to it. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I didn't. That night, it escalated. The whisper became more urgent, insistent, and now there was a new sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing around the room. I sat frozen, listening as they circled my bed. I didn't want to move, didn't want to make noise, didn't want it to notice I was awake. Then a voice, clear this time, and not just whispering my name, "Get up." I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear, and then it started speaking other things. Fragments, like memories it shouldn't know. The attic, the fire, don't forget, the children. I had no attic, no fire, no children. My apartment was simple, one floor, rented to me after the previous tenant moved out. I ran out the next morning, leaving the apartment unlocked. I stayed at a friend's place, exhausted and shaking, but even there, it followed me. I would wake in the middle of the night to hear my name whispered, faint, coming from the corners of the room. I started to notice patterns. Every time I slept, it whispered, followed me, tried to make me see something. I called in a paranormal investigator, half joking, half hoping they could explain it. The investigator came, an older woman named Marla who had dealt with haunted homes across the Midwest. She didn't laugh, didn't dismiss me. She spent the day in my apartment, setting up equipment, asking questions, making notes. At first, nothing happened, but when night fell, the temperature dropped drastically. She saw the same shadow I had seen, and on her recorder, there was the whispering, almost speaking in a language she didn't recognize. Marla explained that she thought the entity was tied to the apartment, but not recent. It wasn't the previous tenant. It wasn't me. Some places carry echoes, she said. Residual energy. It seems intelligent, but it's not normal. She suggested a cleansing, rituals, even moving my furniture in ways to disorient it, but she warned me it might not leave. I tried everything. Salt lines, sage, rearranging furniture, leaving lights on all night, staying awake as long as I could. Nothing worked. It became bolder. It started appearing more visibly. Blurs of movement when I wasn't looking directly at it, shapes in mirrors that weren't my reflection, that shadows in the corners that disappeared when I approached. It whispered things I didn't understand, demanded things I couldn't give, and always, always called my name. Eventually, I had to make a choice. I couldn't live there. I moved out, packed my things in the middle of the night, and never returned. I stayed with friends for a while, changed apartments again. But even now, years later, if I'm alone at night, sometimes I hear it. Just faint, distant, almost like a memory I can't shake. My name, dragged out slowly, a whisper that chills me to the bone. Emma! I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was bound to that apartment or to me. All I know is, for a while, it was part of my nights, part of my dreams, part of my life, in a way I couldn't control or understand. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear that same faint tapping. And I remember the feeling of someone or something watching me from the corner of the room. I've learned to sleep with lights on, to leave the television running. I've stopped trying to rationalize it because the world is big and strange and not everything makes sense. And most importantly, I never, ever answer when I hear my name whispered in the dark. Sometimes when I drift off anyway, I swear I feel the air change in the room. A subtle shift, almost like a presence settling in, waiting. And then I remember it's patient. It waits. It always waits. And in those moments, I know that no matter where I go, no matter what I do, part of me will always feel it there, just beyond my sight, whispering, always whispering my name, dragging it out slowly like it's tasting it, savoring it. The tapping, the whispers, the shadows, they're not gone. They've followed me through new apartments, through new cities, always lurking in the periphery. Friends tell me it's stress, imagination, PTSD from moving to a new place alone, but I know better. I've lived it. I've felt it press down on me at night, felt its breath brush my skin when no one else is there. And the thing is, it doesn't just want to be noticed. It wants to be remembered, and I remember every night. Even now, as I lie here writing this, I feel a shift in the air, a weight at the edge of the room, and I hear it, faint but unmistakable, calling my name, dragging it out, stretching it across the darkness like a rope I could trip over in my sleep. Emma. It has a patience that I will never have. And I know, no matter how far I run, no matter how many nights I sleep elsewhere, that whisper will find me. It always does. And when I hear it, I don't answer. I don't dare. Because I've learned one thing. Some presences, some entities, don't care about fear, reason, or logic. They wait. They watch. They whisper, and they know that eventually everyone sleeps. Story the end.